The gate clanged shut behind her, not loud, but final, metal against metal. And then, the silence. She didn't look back, didn't speak, just pressed the worn evacuation pass into the soldier's gloved hand and pointed. Not at her own child, at the one standing behind her. The boy, the one who wasn't hers. The soldier blinked, confused. "Ma'am, this pass is for one adult, one child." She nodded and stepped back. "But your son," she didn't flinch, didn't speak, only placed her hand on the stranger's child's shoulder. A small, silent act. The boy's sister sobbed, clutched his hand, then looked up at the woman, this woman who had fed them stale bread in the dark, who had given them warmth and water and the last of her strength. "But why?" the girl asked, broken. The woman only whispered, "Make it count." Then the gates opened. The truck roared. The children were lifted in. The soldier hesitated. One last look at the woman standing in the snow. Her child pounded the glass, face red, voice hoarse. "Mom!" But she didn't move. Not toward him, not toward the truck. She stood still, frozen, tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks like rivers through ash. And when the truck pulled away, carrying 2 children into the unknown, only one of them hers, she turned around and walked back into the ruins. You can hate her, I did, for years I did. But before you judge what she did, before you swear you would never do the same, you have to hear the rest. A fever, a missing ration, a bunker full of silence, a child too weak to walk, and 2 strangers knocking in the rain. There was a mother once, and then there was a choice no mother should have to make. Fade to black, wind howls, glass rattles in a broken window. Somewhere, far off, a child coughs. Before the world broke, it was just another Tuesday. She was already awake when the sun rose, though she wouldn't call it morning. The sky was a dull steel gray, and the cold seeped in through the cracked window above the sink. But inside their modest kitchen, something like warmth clung to the corners. The hum of the old radio, the smell of wet soil from the windowsill herbs, the rhythmic breath of a child sleeping in the next room. She stood barefoot on the cold tile floor, slicing the last ripe tomato from the garden. Her son would wake soon, and he still liked it sweet, sprinkled with a pinch of salt and sugar, placed on the side of his toast. Rituals of comfort she refused to let go, even as the shelves emptied and neighbors stopped saying good morning. There were rumors, of course. Northern border unrest, a power station bombed, but rumors had become background noise, like sirens that no longer made anyone flinch. Her son Leo was 6, curious, quiet, fever-prone. He'd spent most of the winter sick, his small body curled under wool blankets like a wounded bird. This morning, his cheeks were flushed again. She placed the plate down beside his bed and brushed the sweat from his forehead. Still warm, too warm. She didn't have a thermometer anymore. Didn't need one. Mothers know. Radio static. A government voice breaks through, calm, rehearsed. "This is a national broadcast. Citizens of Sector 9, please remain indoors. A Level 3 emergency has been declared. All cross-border transport is suspended. Further instructions will follow." The tomato slipped from her hand. Door slams. She rushes outside. People were already moving, fast, silent, frantic. Cars jammed the main road. A man with a butcher's apron was dragging 2 heavy bags behind him, his eyes wide, not looking at anyone. She stepped back inside, locked the door, then unlocked it again, just in case someone needed help. It happened later that afternoon. She was boiling stale rice in a rusted pot when she heard it. 3 knocks at the back door. Not the front, the back, quiet, cautious. She hesitated, gripped the kitchen knife, then opened it. A girl stood there, maybe 10, maybe 12, thin arms wrapped around a bundle of damp cloth. Inside the cloth, a boy, younger, barely breathing. The girl's voice cracked like frost beneath footsteps. "Please, he's burning. I don't know where my parents are." The mother said nothing, just moved aside. The girl stepped in, soaked, shivering, barefoot. The pot of rice was still boiling. Without a word, she ladled it into 2 chipped bowls, one for Leo, one for them. There would be none for her tonight. That was the first time I gave something I couldn't afford to give, and I told myself it was only for one night. But one night becomes 2, and love grows where silence sits too long. That evening, the neighborhood changed. It was quiet, but not in the way peace is quiet. In the way threat is. The streetlights blinked and died. The sky turned ash-colored with distant smoke. The nurse across the road, old, sharp-eyed, ex-military, began boarding her windows. She looked across the street at the mother holding 2 sick boys and nodded once. No smile. Just the silent recognition of someone who knows what's coming. An hour later, someone knocked again. This time it was a soldier, barely out of boyhood, face hollowed by dust. He asked for water. She gave it. He lingered. "You hear anything on your end?" She shook her head. He leaned closer. "Evacuation orders are coming, not for everyone, just for children under 7. And only if they pass the health screening." He looked at Leo, then at the boy wrapped in damp cloth. She felt her heart drop like a stone in water. No splash, just sinking. Not both. The house felt smaller that night. The furniture, once familiar, now seemed like hollow props in a play that was ending. The blankets were too thin, the air too still. Every sound from outside, footsteps, whispers, the distant thump of armored wheels, felt like the breath before a scream. She moved through the house quietly, gathering only what mattered. Not much was left. A child's photo in a cracked frame, a wool scarf her mother once knitted, the last bottle of clean water. No toys, no books, no memories that couldn't fit inside a coat pocket. She sat on the floor beside Leo, who was curled up with his face turned to the wall. His breathing was shallow, still too warm. She touched his hair, damp. The fever wasn't breaking. Across the room, the refugee girl slept sitting up, her hand wrapped tightly around her brother's wrist, as if letting go meant losing him forever. The mother stared at the 3 of them. Her son, the 2 strangers. She tried to draw a line between them, tried to remind herself who she was here to protect, but the line kept blurring. What no one tells you is that war doesn't just take your things. It takes your certainty, your clarity, and replaces it with silence you can't argue with. She found a scrap of fabric and knelt beside Leo. With a piece of charcoal, she wrote his name on it. Neat, careful, like writing a label on a school uniform. She sewed it into the collar of his coat. Not for him, for whoever might find him. Then she did the same for the other boy, wrote his name with shaking hands, even though she'd just learned it the day before. Outside, the nurse from across the street stood by her gate, waiting. The mother stepped out into the cold. No words were exchanged. The nurse reached into her coat and handed her a vial. Dark glass wrapped in cloth. "Old fever meds," she muttered. "May not do much, but it's all that's left." The mother stared at it. "I can't pay." "Don't," the nurse said. "Just try to save one." The mother didn't ask what she meant. She already knew. She returned inside and sat down at the kitchen table. The house around her seemed to fade at the edges, like a dream waking up. She took out the pencil stub and a torn sheet of paper, and she began to write. Not a letter, a reckoning. To Leo, to herself, to the part of her that wouldn't survive tomorrow. "My sweet boy, if this letter finds you, then maybe the world didn't end. Maybe someone saved you. Maybe that someone wasn't me." Later that night, she sat by the window with both boys sleeping beside her, one on either shoulder. The girl rested on the floor nearby, curled like a question mark, her face pressed to the coat she never took off. Sirens howled in the distance. Then the rumble came. Metal on asphalt. The sound of evacuation. She stood, and she knew this would be the last night her family lived in one piece. Fade out. A last shot of the mother silhouetted against the window, hand pressed to the glass. The children asleep behind her. Snow beginning to fall outside. There's no sound in a sealed room like the sound of someone trying not to cry. Not weeping, not sobbing, just the shuddering breath of someone whose soul is unraveling. That's the sound the bunker was full of. The underground shelter had once been a subway station. Abandoned, half collapsed. Concrete walls smeared with mildew. The ceiling rusted and leaking in places. The stairway down was choked with soot and dust. Graffiti covered the walls. Old slogans from another war no one remembered. The government had repurposed it quickly. Temporary civilian protection site, they called it. No one called it that now. Just below, inside, the air was thick, smelled like wet iron and rot. The lights flickered, yellow bulbs strung like dying stars overhead. People had built partitions out of broken benches, cardboard, anything they could carry. The lucky ones had sleeping bags. Most didn't. Her son coughed as they descended. The refugee children followed, silent, too tired to speak, too afraid to ask questions. The nurse was already down there, so was the young soldier, and about 24 others, old men, teenage girls, a family of 5 who never let go of each other's hands. They were each given 1 loaf of government-issued bread, stale, hard as stone. She didn't eat hers. She broke it into 3 parts. 1 for Leo, 1 for the girl, 1 for the boy. She chewed nothing, drank nothing, and still, she felt full of a gnawing fear that couldn't be named. A whispered argument in the shadows, the soldier's voice. This place wasn't built to last. They said a week. It's already day 12. The nurse snapped. Then dig yourself out, or shut up. I thought I had already given everything. Food, safety, warmth. But below takes something else. Below takes your edges, your language, yourself. She began to forget what sunlight felt like. Leo's fever pulsed on and off like a second heartbeat. Sometimes he'd wake and smile. Sometimes he'd talk to people who weren't there. The refugee boy helped her fan him with a crumpled paper plate. The girl sat beside them, sketching on old newspapers with a blunt pencil. She drew the mother's face, not as it was, but as she remembered it, softer, younger, unbroken. The days blurred underground. Time had no shape, no sunrise, no shadows, just the rhythm of footsteps, coughs, whispers, and bread. Every evening, the soldier counted rations, 1 loaf per person. He carved names into a broken plank of wood to track them. But people began to disappear. First an old man with a limp, then a young couple who wandered too far looking for clean water. Some said they left, some said they were taken. The nurse said nothing. She just kept cleaning her tools with dirty cloth and watching Leo. His fever burned higher now. The mother rationed his water, half a cup in the morning, half at night. But it didn't matter. The medicine she'd been given by the nurse was gone. 2 drops, 3 days ago. No change. She tried to sing to him once, a lullaby she'd used when he was small, but her voice cracked before the second line, and she never tried again. The refugee girl took to sketching strangers. She gave each picture a name: the quiet man, the tired soldier, the woman who doesn't blink. She drew Leo often, never with his eyes closed, as if keeping them open in charcoal could keep them open in life. One night, someone stole a loaf. Not hers, not the children's, but the panic spread like infection. Accusations, shouting. A woman slapped her husband for speaking too loud. A boy threatened to stab anyone who touched his things. The soldier tried to calm them. The nurse stood up, raised her voice. Nims. If you fight here, we all die here. No one answered, but the hunger in their eyes never left. That night, the girl and her brother huddled together, shivering. The mother watched them from the floor. She had only one extra blanket. Leo was too hot, sweating through his sleeves, but the girl's brother was shaking. Violently, she stood, quietly crossed the room, placed the blanket over his small body. The girl looked up at her, said nothing, only pulled it tighter. I hated myself for doing the right thing, because doing the right thing didn't save my son. It just made someone else warm. The next morning, the soldier brought out a new loaf. One extra, found behind a collapsed column. It was moldy on one end, still edible. He held it up, waited. No one moved. Then the mother stepped forward, not because she wanted it, but because she knew someone would fight if she didn't. The soldier gave it to her, eyes full of guilt. She broke it in half, gave one piece to the girl, one to her brother. Someone behind her whispered, "She's feeding strangers while her own son dies." But no one said it louder than that. She returned to Leo, lifted his head, pressed a cloth to his lips. He didn't open his eyes, but he breathed. Still breathing, still here. By day 15, no one used names anymore, only gestures, glances. A nod meant, "I have some water." A lifted brow meant, "Don't come closer." Even kindness became wordless, because words meant promises, and no one wanted to promise anything in a place where nothing lasted. The air grew heavier, not thicker, just closer, like the walls were moving in. The soldier stopped shaving. His hands shook when he counted rations. He tore the names off the plank one by one, each time someone didn't return. The nurse stopped giving updates. When people asked, she only said alive. No more, no less. Leo's eyes stayed closed now. He still breathed, but shallow, irregular. The mother stopped sleeping. She sat beside him, fingers resting gently on his chest, counting every rise and fall. Every time he exhaled, she held her own breath, waiting to see if another would come. And when it did, she whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone, just to the silence. The refugee girl clutched her sketchbook like a life raft. She had drawn the mother again, but this time, not with open eyes or strong hands. This time, she drew her as she looked now, gray, thin, folded in half beside her son's body, one hand outstretched like a branch. The mother didn't look at it. Couldn't. Voice over, haunted, slow. No one ever tells you how quiet despair is. It doesn't scream. It doesn't break things. It just removes pieces of you 1 hour at a time. On day 17, someone died. Not loudly, just stopped breathing in the corner. No one noticed for hours. When they moved the body, they found a blanket beneath it, still warm. The argument started with whispers, then blame. He didn't bring that in. Someone took from the emergency pile. Who's stealing? The girl flinched. The boy looked at the mother, wide-eyed. She knew what they were thinking. That night, she took the last of her own bread, the piece she had saved secretly, folded deep in her coat, and walked it across the room. To the boy who had lost his grandfather, she handed it to him, said nothing, just turned away. Someone saw. Someone always does. Back at her space, Leo was cold now, not just from fever, from something deeper. She wrapped him in what she could, held him against her chest. And still, it wasn't enough. I gave the last of what I had, and the worst part was, I didn't even cry, because I couldn't remember how. It was the nurse who said it first. Not gently, not cruelly, just plainly, like a fact that didn't care about feelings. He's not going to survive the journey. She didn't even look up when she said it, just kept folding bandages with stiff fingers. The mother stared at her. You don't know that. The nurse shrugged. I do. We all do. Look at him. Leo was barely breathing now. His body still, like sleep, but too still. His lips were cracked. His fingers curled in on themselves. He didn't wake when she whispered his name. That night, she didn't speak to anyone. She sat in the corner of the bunker with her son in her lap, his head tucked beneath her chin. The girl drew again. The boy slept beside a stranger who snored through a nosebleed. The soldier stood near the exit, rifle slung but useless, eyes unfocused. When the government truck arrived on day 18, no one cheered. The door above was open for the first time in over a week. Blinding light poured down the stairwell, gold and dust and memory. A voice echoed from above, 1 child per tag, 1 adult per household, final call. The soldier turned to the crowd, held up the last remaining evacuation pass. The only one left. People didn't move, not at first. Then whispers, who should get it? Whose child still has a chance? Who's strong enough to make the climb? The mother said nothing. She looked at Leo, then at the refugee boy, still thin, still shaking but breathing. Awake. A chance. And then at the girl, who sat beside her sketchbook, drawing all of them again. Quiet, honest, no drama, just the truth. That night, the mother began to write, not to anyone outside. To Leo, my love, I want you to live. More than anything, I want you to live. But sometimes wanting is not enough. Sometimes love means seeing the truth and choosing pain anyway. She sat beside the girl and the boy while they slept, held the pass in her hand. She could take Leo, carry him on her back. But what if he didn't survive the climb? What if she died trying and no one made it? And the boy could walk, could climb, could breathe. And he was someone's child too. As she held the pass in the dark, her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from something worse, conviction. She stood, stepped toward the girl's bag, slipped the pass inside, behind the sketchbook. Paused, looked at the drawing. It was her, holding Leo. But in the sketch, they were both smiling. She turned away, did not cry. I used to believe love was about never letting go. But now I think, maybe real love is choosing who gets to keep breathing even when it's not you, even when it's not yours. She sat back beside her son, pressed her hand to his cheek, closed her eyes, and waited for morning. Fade out. Muffled echoes, the sound of boots climbing down into the dark. A name called. The girl opens her bag, finds the pass, looks up. The mother nods once. The girl tries to speak, but the mother shakes her head. Just says, make it count. The light came in like a knife. The metal door at the top of the stairs screeched open. For the first time in days, a sliver of sky could be seen. Blue, fractured by smoke. And then voices, soldiers, shouting, organizing, naming names. One of them stepped halfway down the staircase. This is a temporary extraction. Limited seats, 1 adult, 1 child. Show identification. Final transport leaves in 20 minutes. He sounded bored, like he wasn't talking about lives, like he wasn't talking about children. The soldier in the bunker, the one who'd been with them since the beginning, looked to the mother. His eyes were cracked glass. No more orders, no more rules. Only question marks where certainty used to live. He pulled her aside, spoke low. There's a way. I can get Leo on. I can make it look like he's cleared. She blinked. Even if he's too weak? He didn't answer. Just said, but you'd owe me, and I don't think your boy... I don't think he'd make it anyway. She didn't reply, didn't argue. She just turned and walked away, back to the shadows, to the floor, to the children sleeping in a world that no longer made sense. Leo didn't stir when she touched his face, didn't flinch when she whispered his name. He was still warm, but distant, somewhere far away. Across the room, the girl was sitting up now, her eyes wide, afraid. She'd found the pass in her bag, clutched it in both hands like it might disappear. The boy beside her blinked at the light from above, then turned to the mother. Do we go now? He asked. She didn't answer, just stared at them. 1 pass, 2 children, 1 moment that could not be undone. I waited for someone to stop me, for someone to say, no, this is wrong. But no one did, because no one knew who the pass belonged to. Because I never told them. The nurse came beside her. She had heard. Didn't say much, only this: if you're going to do it, don't change your mind halfway. The worst thing you can do to a child is almost save them. She nodded and made the final decision. She didn't speak as she helped the boy into his coat. He didn't ask why. Children in war learn fast. When kindness appears, you don't question it. You just move. The girl stared at her, clutching the pass. "Why are you doing this?" The mother crouched beside her, brushed the dirt from her cheeks, touched the collar of her coat. "Because someone once did the same for me." It wasn't true, but it was easier than the truth. The girl's hands were trembling. "He's not your son." The mother smiled, faintly. "He doesn't need to be." She returned to Leo. Kneeling beside him, she pulled his coat tighter, tucked the scrap of cloth with his name inside the inner lining, where someone might find it, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "I love you, my little Ember." She wanted to say more, everything. The story of how he was born in the first snowfall of a peaceful winter, how he once thought thunder was the sky hiccuping, how he used to call tomatoes red moons. But her throat locked, and the silence swallowed the goodbye. The soldier called out again. Voices echoed down the stairwell. "Now boarding, no exceptions, 20 seconds. She turned, took the boy's hand, walked him toward the light. Each step felt like a betrayal. Each footfall was a severing. Behind her, Leo stirred. A faint cough, a flicker of breath. She didn't turn around. She knew if she saw his eyes, she'd fall to pieces. And pieces couldn't save anyone. At the base of the stairs, the soldier checked tags. The girl held the pass forward with both hands. The boy stood beside her, silent. The soldier looked at them, then looked past them, at the woman watching from the shadows. "You're not coming?" She shook her head. "Just one step backward." The soldier frowned. "Your kid?" She didn't answer, only placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, then backed away. Leo's voice cracked the silence. From deep in the bunker, "Mom." The girl flinched. The boy turned, confused. The mother stood still. Stone. The soldier hesitated. "Ma'am, are you sure?" She nodded. Cut him off with silence. And then, she whispered it again. To herself, to the girl, to the sky above them. "Make it count." The truck engine roared. Doors slammed shut. The boy was lifted in. The girl followed, looking back only once. She saw the woman standing below the stairs, her eyes glassy, her arms empty. No wave, no farewell, just distance. And choice. I didn't hold his hand when the truck left. I didn't kiss him goodbye. I didn't scream or chase or cry. Because sometimes, silence is the only way to survive a decision you'll never forgive yourself for. As the truck pulled away, the girl pressed her hand to the glass. The boy sat beside her, confused, but safe. And in the blur of passing light and shadow, the mother turned around and walked back into the dark. The truck was gone. The light from above faded. The door slammed shut. The staircase once again became a tunnel of shadows. And she was alone. Not really, not entirely. There were still others in the bunker, but she couldn't feel them anymore. Her body returned to the room, but something else stayed behind on those steps. Something quiet and warm and irrevocable. Leo lay where she'd left him. His face was pale, his lips chapped. His hand twitched slightly in his sleep like he was reaching for something. She knelt beside him and held it. No one asked what had happened. They all knew, or guessed, or had made their own impossible trade in another form. The nurse didn't speak, just handed her a wet cloth and walked away. The soldier sat down in the far corner, head between his knees. He hadn't looked her in the eye since the truck left. The worst part wasn't the leaving. The worst part was surviving it. The refugee girl's sketchbook had fallen open. She had left it in a hurry. A drawing fluttered on the stone floor. It was a picture of the boy, the one who had just left, holding a small flower in his hand. And next to him, the mother. But in the sketch, she was smiling. The real woman stared at it, then flipped to the next page. Leo, sleeping, then another, the nurse, back turned, then a final page, blank, except for a title written in the top corner. The woman who gave her place away. She closed the book, didn't cry, didn't speak, just sat beside Leo and waited. That night, the cold came fast, faster than usual. The generator failed. Something about the wiring shorted out. No light, no warmth, no more flickering hope. People huddled in silence. Some prayed, others cursed. She did neither. She held her child close and counted his breaths. 1, 2, pause. 3, 4, longer pause. 5, still breathing, but fading. I told myself I did the right thing. I told myself it was love. I told myself 1,000 things that night, and none of them stopped the cold from coming. At some point, her eyes shut, just for a moment, but when she opened them again, the night had passed. The bunker was nearly silent, and Leo was no longer beside her. She didn't scream when she saw he was gone, didn't bolt upright, didn't shout for help, didn't cry into the stone. She simply sat, still, like the air around her had thickened, turned to glass. Leo wasn't in his bedroll. His coat was folded neatly at the edge of the blanket, the one with his name sewn into the collar. The cloth was still warm, but he was not there. The others in the bunker watched her. They didn't speak, didn't ask. What could they say? If he had died, she hadn't buried him. If he had wandered, no one had seen. If he had been taken, no one had tried to stop it. She stood slowly, walked to the far end of the bunker, to the tunnel sealed off by rubble. There, by the crumbling wall, she found a small piece of paper, charred at the edges. It was a page from her letter, the one she'd written by candlelight before giving away the pass. She recognized the curve of her own handwriting, shaky but sure. Most of the words were gone, burned away, except the last 3 lines. I did it for you, and I don't need you to understand. I just hope one day you don't hate me for it. She folded it, pressed it to her chest, and sat down in the dust. The nurse came beside her, offered a flask of water. The mother didn't take it. The nurse didn't force it. She just sat beside her for a while, said nothing. Sometimes silence was mercy. The hours passed. The bunker emptied. People drifted up into the light one by one, or disappeared during the night. The soldier left without saying goodbye. The nurse followed days later. Soon, only shadows remained. The mother stayed, not out of choice, out of absence. One night, a sound. Footsteps, soft, bare. She opened her eyes. A child stood before her, not Leo. Another, small, shivering, nameless. He didn't speak, just looked at her with eyes so wide they reflected everything she had lost. She reached for him, wrapped him in her coat, held him like she had held her own. And this time, she didn't say anything. I'm not a mother anymore. I'm not anything, really. Just a heartbeat that still flinches when a child is cold. She rocked the child back and forth. No lullaby, no name, just warmth. Just the echo of something once called love. Snow had begun to fall again. She saw it in the cracks of the ceiling, small flakes drifting in where the stone had split, light enough to land without a sound. The bunker was nearly empty now. Only a few faces remained, too weak to climb, too broken to leave. And her, she no longer knew how many days had passed. Her hands were cracked, her hair stiff with dust. The coat around her shoulders belonged to another time, another woman. But the child in her arms was warm, breathing, alive. That was enough. He hadn't spoken since she found him. He didn't cry, didn't ask questions. He only stared, wide-eyed, quiet, as if afraid sound would make the walls collapse. She didn't ask who he belonged to. She didn't need to. In this world, children didn't belong to anyone. Not anymore. She fed him what was left, a crust of bread softened in boiled water. one sip at a time. At night, she wrapped him in what warmth remained, held him against her chest, counted his breaths like she once had with Leo. Not to replace her son, not to forget, but because silence needed something to cling to. One morning, she found the sketchbook again. It had been left behind by the girl who'd gone on the truck. Inside, drawings of every soul the bunker had swallowed. Faces she no longer remembered clearly, preserved in charcoal and pencil like fading prayers. At the very back, a folded sheet of paper. A letter. It wasn't addressed, but she knew who it was for, as the paper unfolds. To the woman who stayed behind. I don't know your name. I never knew your story. But I saw you. I drew you because I didn't want the world to forget someone like you ever lived. You gave us your place, your blanket, your silence. And now I carry all of it with me. I made it. He made it. And I hope, wherever you are, you kept something for yourself too. She folded the letter, pressed it against her lips, didn't cry, just stared at the child beside her. Sleeping, breathing. Maybe I didn't keep anything for myself, but maybe this was never mine to keep. The day the roof collapsed, it didn't begin with an explosion. There was no thunder, no screams, just a soft, slow groan. Like the building itself had finally grown tired of holding everyone's grief. Then a crack, then dust, then darkness. She had only seconds to move. She grabbed the child, shielded him with her body. Concrete rained down. Steel snapped like ribs breaking in the chest of the earth. When the dust cleared, the main tunnel was buried, and most of the others were gone. She lay under a beam for hours, maybe longer. Her leg was pinned. She didn't cry out, didn't scream. She simply looked at the boy who lay tucked against her ribs, miraculously untouched, still alive. And she knew she had to get out. Not for her, for him. She gritted her teeth, pushed the beam aside inch by inch. Her skin tore open against jagged stone. Blood soaked into the dust. Every breath felt like swallowing fire. But the boy was watching, so she kept moving. By nightfall, she had reached the far end of the bunker, where the old stairwell was still intact, still blocked, but only barely. A narrow slit of light filtered through the cracks above. Gray, cold, like the breath of the world itself. She tied the child to her chest with strips of blanket and began to climb. Her fingers bled, her knees buckled. She crawled, not like a hero, but like a wounded animal, desperate and slow. And all the while, one phrase beat inside her like a pulse. Don't let this one die too. At the top, she broke through a wooden hatch. It gave way suddenly, rotten from snow. She collapsed into a snowfield. The cold hit like a slap. The light was blinding. She could barely breathe. But they were out, alive. She lay in the snow, staring up at a sky that looked far too big for someone who had been buried for so long. The boy pressed his face to her chest. He was warm, breathing. She whispered, "You made it, you made it." And for the first time since the bunker closed, she wept. I didn't crawl out to be saved. I crawled out so he wouldn't be buried beside a woman no one remembered. In the distance, she saw smoke, a village, or what remained of one. She stood, barely, took the boy's hand, and walked toward it. The village was nearly gone. Burned out buildings, collapsed roofs, boot prints frozen in the slush, headed nowhere. She found a shack with half a roof and walls that still stood, enough to keep the wind off the boy, enough to breathe. She made a fire out of wet wood and paper scraps, burned part of the sketchbook to keep him warm, but left the drawings untouched. Even now, even after everything, she couldn't bring herself to burn the faces. She sat on the floor beside the fire. The boy slept with his head on her thigh. She took a piece of charcoal from the ash, and on the back of a tattered ration slip, she began to write again. One last letter, but this time, she didn't expect it to be found. My sweet child, if you are reading this, then maybe you lived. That's all I ever wanted. even if you had to live without me. You probably heard stories that I gave you away, that I left you, but none of them are true. Not really, because I never stopped being yours." She paused, hands shaking, charcoal smudging the edge of her palm. She looked at the child beside her. Not Leo, but not a stranger either. Not anymore. They say the hardest thing is losing someone, but I think the harder thing is choosing to let them go when you still have the strength to hold on. You were fading, you were burning up, and I knew if I tried to carry you into that truck, I'd lose both of us. But if I gave someone else a chance, someone strong, someone who could carry hope forward, maybe, just maybe, you'd forgive me one day. The fire cracked. The snow outside thickened, silent, heavy, clean. Final lines of the letter. I don't need you to say thank you. I don't even need you to remember me. But if one day you have a child of your own, and you feel the world breaking around you, and you have to make a choice you never thought you'd face, I hope you'll hear my voice, not to tell you what's right, because I never knew, but to remind you that love isn't always about staying. Sometimes it's about stepping away so they can live. She placed the letter on the windowsill. Let the wind take it. Not to be found, but to be released. She sat back, eyes half closed, and for the first time since the day the door closed behind the truck, she smiled. Years later, in a different country, under a different sky, a girl sat alone in a refugee center. She was older now, taller, stronger, but her eyes still carried the same weight, like someone who had lived 2 lives by the age of 15. In her hands, the sketchbook, worn at the corners, pages smudged, edges curled, but inside, every drawing had survived. Faces of the forgotten, eyes that had seen war, hands that had given without asking. She turned to the final page. It was blank, had always been blank. But that night, she opened her pencil case and began to draw. Slow, deliberate, careful. Not from memory, from feeling. The woman, not heroic, not whole, just still. Eyes like the end of a storm, lips pressed tight, as if holding back everything she never got to say. Behind her, a cold metal door, fogged glass. And on the other side of that glass, a boy reaching. When it was done, she titled it, in small, simple letters, "The Woman Who Walked Back." She closed the sketchbook, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, "I remember. No one ever found her body, no one ever knew her name, but someone remembered her eyes. And in a world that had forgotten how to feel, just one look like that was enough to start healing again." Fade out. A snow-covered tree, a strip of cloth tied to a branch, faded, fluttering. Somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter. I don't need forgiveness. I just hope that in some dream, you'll run into my arms and say, "Mom, you did the right thing." What would you have done if it were your child? Do you understand her choice, or does it haunt you? Was she brave or just broken? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. And if this story stayed with you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to feel something, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Sometimes a quiet story says the most. Thanks for being here.